You cannot force the mind into retirement. Practice of the perfect knowledge way, or reality way of Adidam, is not dependent on having first caused the mind to be quiet. You cannot cause the mind to be quiet except by giving yourself a blow on the head, for example, or being anesthetized or going to sleep. You cannot force or self-cause the mind into retirement. However, it is possible to realize my avatarically self-revealed divine and a causal self-nature, self-conditioned self-state by grace of my effortless, divine, avataric, transcendental spiritual self-transmission. It is possible to realize that I stand prior to the mind, and for you to be so utterly turned to me that you are no longer struggling with the mind, but simply standing in my position, in which there is always already no thought, and therefore no requirement to stop thinking. Practice of the perfect knowledge way, or reality way of Adidam, is not about preventing thinking or doing anything to cause the mind to be quiet. Even the preliminary form of perfect knowledge practice in the reality of Adidam is about standing always already prior to the mind, prior to the body, prior to the conditional universe. When you are perfectly turned to me, in other words, when you are established in the perfect knowledge of devotion to me, you are always already not thinking. Divine self-realization is not a matter of strategically or by means of any seeking method stopping thoughts, nor is divine self-realization a matter of finding the source of thoughts by some meditative procedure. Divine self-realization is a matter of being that which is always already the case, wherein always already there are no thoughts, no illusions, no perceptions, no world. Divine self-realization is not a matter of starting out with an objective world, or with a separate knowing self, and then seeking to find the source. Divine self-realization is a matter of having transcended all of that search and its procedures, having understood that search most profoundly. Divine self-realization is a matter of priorly and intrinsically standing in the self-position that precedes all egoic presumptions of separateness, relatedness, otherness, and difference. Practice of the perfect knowledge way or reality way of Adidam is not a procedure to find that which is the witness position or the consciousness position. Rather, the perfect knowledge way begins from that position. Finding out the source of the I thought is a procedure you may know about from reading the teaching of Ramana Maharshi, for example, although such a technique is not unique to him. Such a technique is a kind of subjectivist exercise, and there are various modes of such mind exercise and seeking methods. I have described the totality of all the modes of mind exercising and would-be mind transcending seeking methods, which begin with the problem of the mind and on that basis seek to solve it, as the collectively six-stage approach to realization, an approach that exploits the possibilities associated with the causal body. In any and every case, no six-stage seeking method can achieve most ultimate divine self-realization, because all six-stage procedures or seeking methods are merely conditional efforts exercised by ego itself. Practice of the perfect knowledge way or reality way of Adidam is not about seeking the source of the I thought or seeking anything whatsoever. Practice of the perfect knowledge way of reality way of Adidam is perfect because it priorly and intrinsically transcends all seeking and all strategic method. The reality way of Adidam is not a method of seeking methods. The reality way of Adidam is not a method of seeking. Methods of seeking are egoity in action. The way in my divine avataric company, the way of realizing me, is the seventh stage way. Therefore, the reality of Adidam is not based on egoity itself, or on forms, the seeking, or on strategic methods that involve egoic manipulation of the gross, subtle, or causal structures of the body-mind complex. The ego I is not merely a thought that you must trace to its supposed origin. The ego I is an activity, and always comprehensive psychophysical activity, of self-contraction that encompasses the totality of body, emotion, mind, and breath. The ego I is not caused by the inherent and intrinsic and always prior self-nature, or what can be called the self-condition of phenomena. All phenomena depend on that inherent and always prior self-condition, but that self-condition does not cause phenomena. The intrinsic and always prior self-nature, self-condition and self-state is not creating the I thought, and therefore you cannot, in fact, or by an act of strategic and regressive introversion, trace the I thought to it. Nor have you dealt with the matter of egoity merely by tracing the I thought to the conditional silence that precedes it. There is not a self or the self to be realized. There is reality itself, which can be called the self-nature, self-condition and self-state of all and all. The true divine, egoless, indivisible in the causal, self-nature, self-condition and self-state of everything, everyone, every apparent condition, all phenomena, and the presumed separate self. There must be a process of transcending the ego self and its limiting associations, structured as a body-mind complex, or there is no divine self-realization. Therefore, that process must be accomplished by grace, by direct transmission, by transcendental spiritual means that go beyond egoity, beyond dependency on the structures of the body-mind self. Practice of the perfect knowledge way or reality way of Adidam is the practice or demonstration prior to ego I, prior to the body-mind complex, gross, subtle and causal, prior to any thought or any search. Practice of perfect knowledge, even in its preliminary form, is prior to attention. Therefore, the practice of perfect knowledge is not established by means of an act of attention. The practice of perfect knowledge is established in the position prior to attention, prior to all exercises of a psychophysical nature. Psychophysical effort cannot realize that position. The ego cannot realize the divine self-nature, self-condition and self-state. No form of seeking can realize it. The position prior to ego I must be self-located by grace, by transcendental spiritual means. The only by me revealed and given reality way of Adidam is fundamentally a matter of true ego transcending practice in devotional recognition response to me, using the means given by my divine avataric birth, my divine avataric appearance in the cosmic domain, as the focus of or the doorway into the only by me revealed and given process that most ultimately transcends all conditional dependency. The only by me revealed and given reality of Adidam is a radical or at the root process. The reality of Adidam does not take place in the seeker's domain, whether the domain of the great tradition of humankind or the domain of egoity altogether. In the seeker's domain, human experience is made on the basis of the human structure, a structure that is uninspected and not transcended. No search transcends or even can transcend the human structure. If you feel me, you can practice turning wholeheartedly to me, because it is your devotional response to do so. That is the reality of Adidam. If you do not devotionally recognize me, you will not devotionally respond to me. In that case, you cannot and will not turn to me. You may do some kind of strategic exercise that you think is turning to me, but no such exercise has anything to do with realizing me, with entering into the spiritual, transcendental and self-evidently divine sphere of my acausal, divine person and state. There is a necessary foundation process preliminary to the perfect practice of perfect knowledge, because you are identified with a complexly manifesting activity that has accumulated in the form of the concrete specificity of egoity in your own apparent case, the body, mind, self, your presumed identity, narcissus, the ego I. The ego I is the illusion of relatedness. The ego I is attention. Attention and the feeling of relatedness are exactly the same. The true supposition is prior to attention and therefore prior to the feeling of relatedness. The feeling of separateness, the feeling of otherness, the feeling of difference. Relatedness, separateness, otherness and difference are all the same. The ego is fundamentally at its root attention itself. Any exercise of attention exercises the ego and extends the root causal ego into gross and subtle domains of possibility. To be that which is the mere witness of the feeling of relatedness, the mere witness of attention, is to be in the witness position. Attention is not observable by attention. The feeling of relatedness is not observable as a thing in relation to attention. Attention cannot be the object of attention. The feeling of relatedness cannot be the object of attention. Relations of one kind or another can be noticed, but the inherent fundamental root feeling of relatedness is identical to attention. Attention and the feeling of relatedness are the same thing. That is egoity, not the I thought. The I thought occurs in the mind, in the brain and all the rest, and it means the total body-mind complex. However, attention is the root of the body-mind self. Attention is the root act of egoity. Attention manifests as the feeling of relatedness, the feeling of separateness, the feeling of otherness, the feeling of difference, thing, over against attention. All of that is transcended in the only by me revealed and given perfect practice of the only by me revealed and given perfect knowledge way or reality way of Adidam. The root of egoity is attention itself, or the feeling of relatedness. To be established prior to attention, or the feeling of relatedness, is inherently to be in the witness position. To be prior to attention is to be prior to the ego. That is the nature of the preliminary perfect knowledge, listening practice, in the reality way of Adidam. And in due course, a perfect practice of perfect knowledge is established by means of my divine avataric transcendental spiritual self-transmission, manifesting as the radical or at the root self-manifestation of the thumbs, which transcendentally and spiritually self-reveals the position prior to attention, prior to the root feeling of relatedness. Thus, perfect self-realization is the reality way of Adidam, is not realization of a self. The true self is not within. The true self is not the identity of the I thought. There is no identity to self. There is no identity to the I, other than the body, mind, self itself. The I is merely conditional imagery. I is a pattern. I is merely presumed to be the case. The perfect practice of the perfect knowledge way, or reality way of Adidam, is the practice of perfect devotion to me, beyond all difference, and in which there are no differences, none. If there are no differences, then renunciation is inherently perfect. The demonstration of that perfect renunciation shows itself in due course as perfect or divine indifference, utter and inherently freedom, and inherent freedom from all conditional frames of reference.